and thank you for tuning in to our virtual Science on a Sphere show about dwarf lake irises. My name is Alina Bowman, and I am the student presenter for a Science on a Sphere exhibit here at the museum. My colleague Nick Van Acker is also on the call, and he'll be keeping an eye on the chat for me as we go along, so feel free to ask questions at any point, either in the chat or using the Q&A function. So today we're going to be talking about the dwarf lake iris and how we need to learn about plants in order to protect them. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about an issue that is affecting all life on the coasts. Alrighty, let's get started. Alrighty, so has anybody ever seen this plant before? You can put it in the chat maybe. It's really small, it's usually less than 6 inches tall, maybe by the beach. Speaker is hard to understand. Uh-oh. I will try to speak clearer and see if that helps. Maybe. So these are usually found on the beach in Lake Michigan or Lake Huron. Let me know if you're still having trouble hearing me. If you haven't, that's okay. It's not super common. It's actually part of the issue why we're talking about it today. So this is the dwarf lake iris, which is Michigan's state wildflower. There is an echo. An echo pollution. Maybe if I talk quieter, it'll echo less. Okay. Apologize for the echo. The microphone is in the same place as the video, but I will walk closer to it, yes. Alrighty. We will see how this works. So in the whole world, this plant is only found on the coast of the Great Lakes. So here we have a map. And pull it around. So you can see as it goes around. At the tip of the mitten here. So you can see that it's only found in these areas, and it's only found in specific parts of the coast really close to the water. Okay. So this dataset was created using information from a website and app called iNaturalist, where people just like you take pictures of plants and animals and other organisms, and then the community comes together to figure out what you saw so that researchers can use it for things kind of like this. To see where the plants are found, when they're found, all that kind of stuff. So you can let me know in the chat if you've heard of or used iNaturalist before. It's super cool, I use it a lot. So the main takeaway here is that irises live in a very limited range and have a specific habitat that they like to live in. Alrighty. Hopefully the audio, the sounds are fixed a little. Alrighty, so how many of you have ever built a sandcastle at the beach before? It might not have looked like this. I know I wish I had this level of sandcastle building talent. Have any responses in the chat? Any sandcastle builders?
It doesn't look like anybody's responded about the sandcastles. If somebody wants to see a dwarf lake iris in person. And I know I've seen castles before on the coast of Lake Michigan.
Yeah, and I agree, iNaturalist is very useful. Yeah. You do find the coolest stuff about building sandcastles. Like seashells and cool rocks and stuff, sticks even can be cool. Alrighty, so when you build a sandcastle, do you usually build it really close to the water, like in the waves, really far from the water, like on the edge of the beach, or somewhere in between? No general consensus. That's okay. If you think about it, you probably build your sandcastle somewhere in between, right? You want it to be easy to get more wet sand, but you don't want your sandcastle to wash away. So have you ever built a sandcastle early in the day and then come back later and your sandcastle has either been washed away or it's a lot farther from the water? All the time, right? If you spend a lot of time at the beach, it's probably happened to you, yeah. Alrighty, so then if you decided to rebuild your sandcastle, you probably learned from that experience and adjusted where you decided to build, or you just kind of gave up and were like, my sandcastle is going to wash away, and that's okay with me. And that's something that you can do as a person, right? But imagine that the sandcastle you built was a plant that grew there. If a plant grew really close to the water and the water level changed so the plant was closer or farther away from the water, could the plant move? Put those responses in the chat as well. So no, the plants couldn't move, right? They don't really have that luxury. Plants can't just get up and walk away from where they're planted. All right, so let's look at some data about how water levels change. So the water levels in the Great Lakes, don't stay the same. And if you have property on the beach or if you just go there a lot, you probably know that. So we're looking at a small peninsula here. For reference, there's the Mackinac Bridge, the tip of the mitten, and then if we go over here, there you go. All right, so we're looking at a peninsula here, Wilderness State Park. And we're looking at a record low level here. So maybe 2012, 2013 is where this data is coming from. And you can see it's a lot of white. It looks tan. Actually, no. There we go. Can't really see the tan very well, at least on the screen that I'm looking at. But you can see it on the sphere. So there's a lot of exposed land represented here. The blue and the darker color is the water of the lakes. And then here, see a little bit of a change. We're now looking at an average lake level. So over a long period of time, this is what the lake levels are at. There's less exposed land, right? If we go to high, these levels are record high levels, maybe 2019, 2020, that's when we're getting this data from. And you can see that the whole peninsula, there's not a lot of like dark spots or green spots in this peninsula. So let's look back at the low levels. You see it's a lot of light color and then dark, light, dark. So there's only a lake level difference of about 6 feet here. So it doesn't seem like a lot, but you can see that it puts a lot of this peninsula underwater. So let's look at how this relates to the irises. Adjust. All right, so the water levels of the lakes are all about the cycles of evaporation and precipitation. So the water cycle, how clouds form and then how they drop stuff back down on us. So with all the changes in the earth, we're getting a lot more extreme weather in general, so more evaporation, more precipitation, and greater swings in the levels of the Great Lakes. And then, like we talked about a little bit before, the dwarf lake iris lives in a very small, specific habitat. It's found in sand or gravel along beaches and sand dunes. And if the water levels fall, this can be good because there's more space for the plants to live. But when the water levels rise, the plants lose their habitat because it gets flooded. So this is a picture that I took in summer 2019 of the dwarf lake irises in Wilderness State Park, which is one of those record-setting high level years. So what do you notice about this picture, about the water and the plants? Let me. So we have the plants here, and then the water right over there. Plants, and then water over there. Very close together, right? Yeah, so the irises are really close. Yes, the water is close to the plants. Thank you. Yeah, so the water and the plants are very close together. One just medium-sized wave, and these plants are getting soaked. So when I was in the park in 2019, I was with a professor, and we were looking for a lot of cool plants. We were looking for these irises specifically, and we're going to all these places where he knew there had been irises in the past. And when we went there, all of those places were underwater because of these record-setting high years. So these plants, which are really living on the edge, they didn't used to be. Let's look at another picture that I took. All right, adjust. So this is standing in the same spot where I took the previous picture with the irises, and we're looking out onto the lake. And you can see that there's all these sticks in the water, right? And they look like just sticks. Those are actually used to be trees and shrubs. And the irises used to be on the other side of these trees and shrubs from the water, but there's not really that buffer there anymore. All right. So changing water levels sadly aren't the only things threatening this tiny purple plant. Their habitat is already pretty small and shrinking, and with increased shoreline development because people like being on a beach, that means more construction of homes and wider roads, and then also increased chemicals being sprayed, so pesticides, fertilizers, and then especially salt in the winter. And all of these things end up in the water, which is not good for the plants. Another threat is kind of from off-road vehicle use, but it's mostly just that people don't know about it, right? So if you hadn't heard of this plant before, if you don't know that it's kind of threatened, then you wouldn't know not to step on it and not to run it over. So people, and it's so small, people don't even know it's there. So the good news is that the dwarf lake iris is a federally protected plant. It's considered threatened, and it has been protected since 1988. So the populations are being monitored, and some of the people who live on the land with the dwarf lake iris habitat have agreed to help protect it. So how can you help? You can minimize the chemicals that you use on your lawn, whatever chemicals those are, because all those things eventually end up in the water. You can grow native plants at home, but don't dig them up from natural areas. Don't go looking for dwarf lake irises and bring them home. They probably won't survive in your yard anyways, because like I said, they have that specific habitat. And then be mindful where you step when you're in natural places. So don't go wandering off the trails. If you do, be really careful where you step and don't step on any rare plants. Of course, you can't avoid the plants if you don't know what they are. So anytime that you come across a really cool looking plant or fungus or something, take a picture of it and you look at it on iNaturalist or another app called Seek, and then you can figure out what it is, learn more about it, and then tell other people about what you've seen. All right, so before we move on to the larger issue here, are there any questions about the irises or what's going on with them?
We do have one question. Christine's curious how small the irises are.
They're like this big, so like 4-ish, 6 inches tall. So it looks very large right now because it's on the sphere, but there's some pine needles here for comparison. They're just regular sized pine needles. They're not giant pine needles, and there's the plant. So they're small. Any other questions?
Yes, and then Christine also wants to know, is there any evidence that the iris is going to move up the shoreline as the water rises, which is a great question.
That is a great question. And we would hope so, right? But part of the issue is that they're running out of space because you have the wider roads and stuff. I think we found these plants to be parked on the side of the road and then just kind of wandered a couple feet and found them here. So they should be moving up with the water levels, I guess, if they don't get drowned beforehand. But they're running out of space a little bit. So can they grow near inland lakes? So they might be able to, but this is where they're found, so they haven't dispersed to the inland lakes. The iNaturalist data that I found is, I didn't just pick the stuff around the Great Lakes. That's the data that we have. It hasn't been found far inland. It's only found along the edges of the Great Lakes. Yeah. Any more questions about the irises before we move on? Yeah. Alrighty, so let's talk about the second part of what's happening here. So we talked about how the Great Lakes levels are changing, but yeah, okay. So sea levels, like the lake levels, they don't remain the same over time, but there are different factors that affect changes in sea level. This data set that I'm going to pull up next simulates climate changes and ice changes, water level changes in the oceans for the past 21,000 years. And it is slowly moving forward. All right. So let's watch as the ice retreats over North America. It's a lot of white, and that is what it looks like here, too. So, see Michigan is slowly losing its glaciers. So this is kind of a natural cycle, you know, ice melting, water levels rising. But as the ice melts, as the ice over the land melts, then it needs to go somewhere. So it runs into the oceans, which is part of what contributes to sea level rise. It's been happening, you know, gradually over the past 21,000 years. We're at 4,500 BC right now. So it's still going up. So this is going to take a while to go through. Right now, we've mostly got, you know, the ice is mostly only left on Greenland, which it's still there. We're at 1500 AD right now, so we're getting there. All right. But it doesn't just happen over time. Let's look at this data set from 1850 onwards. So this is the seasonal changes in the sea ice. So we're looking at the Arctic here. Yeah. There we go. So it does melt and reform over every year, every season. But the issue is that over the past, you know, couple hundred years, it's been accelerating where the ice melts more and reforms less every year. And that especially affects animals like polar bears that depend on being able to reach and survive on the sea ice. So fast forward to like the 1990s here. You can see how it goes in, and then it'll restart so we can see how it's really changed. 2002. 2007. 2011, 2012, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. All right, and then it's gonna go back to the beginning. So you might have seen it right there, but the patch of ice, the largest extent, was a lot bigger in 1850 than it is in 2017, which is when the data ended. All right, so that's one factor that affects sea level rise is this ice melting and then not reforming quite as much. Another thing that affects the water level rise is temperature, and not just because it melts the ice. Warmer molecules expand, they take up more space than colder molecules do. So when the air temperature rises and the ocean temperatures rise, then the water molecules take up more space, so that increases the sea level a little bit. So this data set shows how temperature has changed all around the world. Why is it not spinning? Spin, there we go. From 1850 again, 1884 to 2012. And it's comparing the temperature of the air to kind of a baseline average from the 1950s to 1980s. So this is kind of where we're at right now. This is that average period. We're at like 1960s right now. And in the past, it was all blue, so that's like it was colder than that average, and the red and orange is it's warmer than that average, and we'll let it go through it again. But you can see that it's getting a lot oranger, and we're like the 1990s now, especially in this area up here. So the Arctic is especially getting a lot redder and oranger. The gathering is getting a lot oranger in general, actually. It'll restart, but it goes through 2012. So the air temperature across the world is, okay, this is back to the 1880s. So it used to be a lot colder, and now it's getting warmer. So most of the warming has happened in the Arctic, where that sea ice is all supposed to be. And if you'd like to learn more about climate change and this phenomenon, I would encourage you to check out our Climate Clues program. So now that we know of some of why the sea levels change, so the ice melting and then the warmer molecules taking up more space, let's look at some sea level rise data. And let it adjust. Okay, so this data set is looking at the rate of sea level change. So blue is decreasing, and then red is increasing. And this is the rate every year, so it goes from -15 to +15 millimeters every year, which doesn't seem like a lot, but we saw in the previous part of the program that only 6 feet of difference in the lakes even caused a lot of that peninsula to be underwater. You can see it's not the same all around the world. There are some parts that are decreasing a little bit, some parts that are increasing a little bit. This is just for this is an average, I think, from 1993 to 2012. So the rate of sea level rise is also predicted to increase over the next few decades. So this will be more of a problem. We'll be getting more of those, green to red colors in here. All right, so let's look at how increasing sea level would impact life on the coast. Here we go. This is going to look at 0 to 6 meters above sea level. If the sea level grew 0 to 6 meters, what would happen? What areas would be affected? And the affected areas are going to be red. It might be a little difficult to see, but you can see it at least in the Amazon, the mouth of the Amazon. That's getting pretty red. And then maybe if we zoom in on, where's my zoom button? There it is. Eastern coast of the US, you might be able to see it a little bit better. So areas like along the East Coast, but especially places like Florida and Louisiana, those are already experiencing issues with sea level rise because like a lot of Louisiana and Florida is kind of at or almost below sea level, even currently. So a lot of the coastal regions of the world will be very much affected by sea level rise of even a couple meters. So we go back to our first data set about sea level rise. Let's talk about the future a little bit. So it starts with the past, and then it has a prediction for future climate data. Come forward a little bit. This is if we stopped all greenhouse gas emissions by 2100. Okay, fictional complete ice melt scenario. So this data set is now looking at what would happen if all of the ice melted. And it's looking up, you see that one white patch of Greenland. I can't point at it. Okay, it's up there, yes. And that if that all goes away, what happens to the sea level then? So if we zoom in, run a little bit. It's not running, that's okay. Oh, there it goes. So if all of the sea level melted, what would happen? You might be able to see it even without me zooming in, but let's see. Zoom. So if all of the ice melted, this is like in a couple of thousand years is what this prediction is for, but you can see that all of Florida and like all of Louisiana and a significant chunk of the coast and like that north of Maine, half of Maine is like, no, it's Canada. Stuff's underwater, yeah, a lot of it. So all this blue, you can see the outline of where Florida used to be, and it won't be there anymore. I'm from Baltimore, so we have the Chesapeake Bay kind of in the middle here, and that's underwater as well. All these places that are on the coasts of rivers, mouths of rivers, bays, oceans, gulfs, all of those areas would be very much affected by sea level rise. So this would have a significant effect not only on plant and animal life, but on human life. So humans love to live near the water, not just for tourism reasons. We've lived near the water for trade and transportation reasons. It's easy to access resources when you're on the coast. It's how our cities have developed, mostly on the coasts. All right, where's my button? Yeah. Industry, trade, transportation, all those things would be severely affected by this ice melt scenario. So the scary part about this fictional scenario is that it might not always be fictional. So in the past few years, there have been some studies that say that the ice sheets that are melting, they're already past the point of no return for melting. The more the ice sheets melt, the faster they melt, and it's this whole feedback loop, which is good. We don't want to end on that depressing note, so let's talk about what we can do with this information. The evaporation and precipitation cycles that affect the Great Lakes water levels, and the melting and precipitation, the melting and expansion processes, that affect sea levels, they're all connected to climate change. So if we want to help the plants, animals, and the people that live on the coasts, we need to think about how we can slow down climate change. And there are things that we can do as individuals, like riding our bikes and walking, taking the bus, carpooling instead of driving everywhere, and then reducing, reusing, and recycling materials we use, like glass, paper, plastic especially, and even clothing. But thinking bigger than the things we can do individually, we can encourage people in charge of industry and policy to consider climate change and environmental health when they're making changes to their industries or to policies. All right, so I can take any last questions that people have about the irises or about sea level rise, Great Lakes level rise, any data set requests. We have a lot of those in the next few minutes. Otherwise, you can take a minute to chill and color our Dwarf Lake Iris coloring page that was posted in the Facebook event. And then, Nick, if you could remind us about the state symbols projects.
Yeah, so I think Alina mentioned at the beginning, but the Dwarf Lake Iris is Michigan's state wildflower. So the state capital, Michigan State Capitol, actually has a really great video project they've been doing all about state symbols. So if you guys are interested in learning about our state fossil or our state reptile, they've been uploading videos to their Facebook. And so I'll put a link to that in the chat. You guys can watch those videos. And they've also been doing just a bunch of great other projects. We're good friends with them. So anything you want to check out over there, they've been doing some good work.
Yeah. Cool. All righty. Any last questions, comments, requests? Got a lot of cool data sets. We just went through a lot of cool data sets, so it's okay if you just want to process the information.
Yep, and we've got a thank you from Michelle.
You're welcome.
And Christine, thank you guys for tuning in.
Yeah, it's been fun. Thanks for answering my questions and asking questions. We love questions. All right. Well, if nobody has any questions or data set requests, then I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, and thanks again for tuning in. All righty.